Section 48 of the Art of Public Speaking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Adams. The Art of Public Speaking by Dale Carnegie and Joseph Berg Asen-Wine. Section 48, Appendix D, Speeches for Study and Practice. Russell Conwell, Acres of Diamonds. Footnote. Reported by A. Russell Smith and Harry E. Grieger, used by permission. On May 21, 1914, when Dr. Conwell delivered this lecture for the 5,000th time, Mr. John Wanamaker said that if the proceeds had been put out at compound interest, the sum would aggregate $8 millions. Dr. Conway has uniformly devoted his lecturing income to works of benevolence. I am astonished that so many people should care to hear this story over again. Indeed, this lecture has become a study in psychology. It often breaks all rules of oratory, departs from the precepts of rhetoric, and yet remains the most popular of any lecture I have delivered in the 44 years of my public life. I have sometimes studied for a year upon a lecture and made careful research and then presented the lecture just once, never delivered it again. I put too much work on it. But this had no work on it, thrown together perfectly at random, spoken offhand without any special preparation, and it succeeds when the thing we study, work over, adjust to a plan is an entire failure. The acres of diamonds, which I have mentioned through so many years, are to be found in Philadelphia, and you are to find them. Many have found them, and what man has done, man can do. I could not find anything better to illustrate my thought than a story I have told over and over again, and which is now found in books in nearly every library. In 1870 we went down the Tigris River. We hired a guide at Baghdad to show us Persepolis, Nineveh, and Babylon, and the ancient countries of Assyria as far as the Arabian Gulf. He was well acquainted with the land, but he was one of those guides who love to entertain their patrons. He was like a barber that tells you many stories in order to keep your mind off the scratching and the scraping. He told me so many stories that I grew tired of his telling them, and I refused to listen, looked away whenever he commenced. That made the guide quite angry. I remember that towards evening he took his Turkish cap off his head and swung it around in the air. The gesture I did not understand, and I did not dare look at him for fear I should become the victim of another story. But although I am not a woman, I did look, and the instant I turned my eyes upon that worthy guide, he was off again. Said he, "I will tell you a story now which I reserve for my particular friends." So then, counting myself a particular friend, I listened, and I have always been glad I did. He said there once lived not far from the river Indus an ancient Persian by the name of Al-Hafed. He said that Al-Hafed owned a very large farm with orchards, grain fields, and gardens. He was a contented and wealthy man, contented because he was wealthy, and wealthy because he was contented. One day there visited this old farmer one of those ancient Buddhist priests, and he sat down by Al-Hafed's fire and told that old farmer how this world of ours was made. He said that this world was once a mere bank of fog, which is scientifically true. And he said that the Almighty thrust his finger into the bank of fog and then began slowly to move his finger around and gradually to increase the speed of his finger until at last he whirled that bank of fog into a solid ball of fire, and it went rolling through the universe, burning its way through other cosmic banks of fog until it condensed the moisture without and fell in floods of rain upon the heated surface and cooled the outer crust. Then the internal flames burst through the cooling crust and threw up the mountains and made the hills of the valley of this wonderful world of ours. If this internal melted mass burst out and copied very quickly, it became granite. That which cooled less quickly became silver, and less quickly gold, and after gold diamonds were made. Said the old priest, a diamond is a congealed drop of sunlight. This is a scientific truth also. You all know that a diamond is pure carbon, actually deposited sunlight. And he said another thing I would not forget. He declared that a diamond is the last and highest of God's mineral creations, as a woman is the last and highest of God's animal creations. I suppose that is the reason why the two have such a liking for each other. And the old priest told Al-Hafed that if he had a handful of diamonds, he could purchase a whole country. And with a mine of diamonds, he could place his children upon thrones through the influence of their great wealth. Al-Hafed heard all about diamonds and how much they were worth, and went to his bed that night a poor man. Not that he had lost anything, but poor because he was discontented, and discontented because he thought he was poor. He said, I want a mine of diamonds. So he lay awake all night and early in the morning sought out the priest. Now, I know from experience that a priest when awakened early in the morning is cross. He awoke that priest out of his dreams and said to him, Will you tell me where I can find diamonds? The priest said, Diamonds? What do you want with diamonds? I want to be immensely rich, said Al-Hafed, but I don't know where to go. Well, said the priest, if you will find a river that runs over white sand between high mountains, in those sands you will always see diamonds. Do you really believe that there is such a river? Plenty of them, plenty of them. All you have to do is just go and find them. Then you have them. Al-Hafed said, I will go. So he sold his farm, collected his money at interest, left his family in charge of a neighbor, and away he went in search of diamonds. He began very properly, to my mind, at the Mountains of the Moon. Afterwards he went around into Palestine, then wandered on into Europe, and at last, when his money was all spent and he was in rags, wretchedness, and poverty, he stood on the shore of that bay in Barcelona, Spain, when a tidal wave came rolling through the Pillars of Hercules, and the poor, afflicted, suffering man could not resist the awful temptation to cast himself into that incoming tide, and he sank beneath its foaming crest, never to rise in this life again. When that old guide had told me that very sad story, he stopped the camel I was riding and went back to fix the baggage on one of the other camels. And I remember thinking to myself, why did he reserve that for his particular friends? There seemed to be no beginning, middle, or end, nothing to it. That was the first story I ever heard told or read in which the hero was killed in the first chapter. I had but one chapter of that story, and the hero was dead. When the guide came back and took up the halter of my camel again, he went right on with the same story. He said that Al-Hafed's successor led his camel out into the garden to drink, and as that camel put its nose down into the clear water of the garden brook, Al-Hafed's successor noticed a curious flash of light from the sands of the shallow stream, and reaching in, he pulled out a black stone having an eye of light that reflected all the colors of the rainbow, and he took that curious pebble into the house and left it on the mantel, then went on his way and forgot all about it. A few days after that, this same old priest who told Al-Hafed how diamonds were made came in to visit his successor, when he saw that flash of light from the mantel. He rushed up and said, "Here is a diamond, here is a diamond. Has Al Hafed returned?" "No, no, Al Hafed has not returned. And that is not a diamond, that is nothing but a stone. We found it right out here in our garden." "But I know a diamond when I see it," said he. "That is a diamond." Then together they rushed to the garden and stirred up the white sands with their fingers, and found others more beautiful, more valuable diamonds than the first. And thus, said the guide to me, were discovered the diamond mines of Golconda, the most magnificent diamond mines in all the history of mankind, exceeding the Kimberley in its value. The great Koh-i-Noor diamond in England's crown jewels, and the largest crown diamond on earth in Russia's crown jewels, which I had often hoped she would have to sell before they had peace with Japan, came from that mine. And when the old guide had called my attention to that wonderful discovery, he took his Turkish cap off his head again and swung it around in the air to call my attention to the moral. Those Arab guides have a moral to each story, though the stories are not always moral. He said, had Al Hafed remained at home and dug in his own cellar or in his own garden, instead of wretchedness, starvation, poverty, and death in a strange land, he would have had acres of diamonds. For every acre, yes, every shovelful of that old farm afterwards revealed the gems which since have decorated the crowns of monarchs. When he had given the moral to his story, I saw why he had reserved this story for his particular friends. I didn't tell him I could see it. I was not going to tell that old Arab that I could see it. For it was that mean old Arab's way of going around a thing, like a lawyer, and saying indirectly what he did not dare say directly, that there was a certain young man that day traveling down the Tigris River